What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. It's that time, guys. It's that time. Everyone's rolling out their top 10 best and worst of the year, and it's time for me to chime in with my top 10 worst of the year. As of filming this video, I was able to watch 110 various releases that came out over the course of 2023. I wish I could have seen more, but I'm glad to have seen just a few more than I did last year when it comes to watching 2022 releases. And as always, these lists are of course subjective. I feel like I have to say that here at the beginning because somebody's going to comment down below with disagreements, and that's okay. If you disagree with my list, that's totally cool, and I look forward to hearing all the various opinions down below as far as your top 10 worst films of 2023. I'm happy to again have seen 110 releases of this year, and like any other lists like this, as time goes on, I'll catch up on the movies that I missed from this year that could easily make this list or alter this list in some way. And so this is just my personal thoughts on the top 10 worst movies that came out in 2023 that I personally got to see. Maybe there's some here on the list that you wish were not. Maybe there are some movies that you think should be on the list, and maybe I never even got around to watching them and they would be on this list had I seen them. Whatever the case may be, again, chime in down below letting me know what your top 10 worst films of the year were for 2023. I'm very excited for all the various movies we have coming out in 2024, and I'm looking forward to checking out all the terrible movies that we will no doubt be watching in 2024 as well. But without further ado, let's actually start off with some honorable mentions. It's something I didn't do in my top 10 videos for last year. We're just gonna really quickly, without any deep explanation, jump straight into my 11 through 20 picks. I'm not gonna get into them. We're only gonna talk about my top 10, but I just wanted to at least list them off for you guys. So here are my honorable mentions and my 11 through 20 on my top 20 least favorite movies of the year. Number 20 goes to Operation Fortune Ruse de Guerre. Number 19 goes to Donor Party. Number 18 is definitely Expendables or Expendables 4, whatever you want to call this movie. Number 17 was Quicksand for me. Number 16 was Condor's Nest. Number 15, A Little White Lie. Number 14, Mafia Mama. Number 13, Fast Charlie. Number 12, Nightmare. And number 11, Leave. And those are my honorable mentions. So without further ado, let's get into the meat and the potatoes of this video, what you actually came to talk about here, and that is my top 10 worst movies of 2023. Starting with number 10, a movie that I feel nobody really even knows existed this year, and that movie is called Heroes of the Golden Mask, which was directed by Sean Patrick O'Reilly and has a star-studded cast of people like Ron Perlman, Natasha Leigh Bordizzo, Patton Oswalt, and boasts the fact that it's the final film of the late Christopher Plummer. This is a movie that after having watched it, it just felt so forgettable. It feels like something that would have come straight to video in the middle of the 2000s, and when I reviewed it earlier this year, this was without a doubt one of those movies that for me felt like one of those TV shows that would come out on TV with subpar animation that were based on a popular movie. Think of something like Barnyard, for instance, which had a movie that was really successful, and then they ended up getting a spin-off TV show for Nickelodeon that the animation for was substantially subpar in comparison to the film. There was a lot of various movies like that and TV show adaptations that we got over the course of the 2000s, and that's kind of what this movie felt like, except the fact that it came out in 2023. It tells the story of a group of individuals with time traveling abilities in a world where they have to protect their kingdom from this evil guy. They have these golden masks that give them secret powers, and this young kid who is not part of this world at all ends up getting swooped up into the whole adventure. There really isn't much more to say about it, but like I said, one of the craziest things about it is the fact that it has a ridiculously star-studded cast. I was just blown away looking at the cast before I even watched the film, and again, this film was boasting in a lot of the emails I got to check this movie out early, the fact that this was the final performance of the late and great Christopher Plummer. And so watching this movie and just seeing this incredible cast just utilized in this incredibly weak film, it makes me wonder, did they have somebody that they owed money to? Did they do this as a favor to a friend? I don't know what the case is, but like I can't imagine that all these actors just signed on to this because they like the script, because the script is not great and the story was not great and the animation was not great. And these are all actors who have been in substantially better movies and TV shows, including in this year, except for Christopher Plummer, of course, and it just, yeah, not a good one. So let's move on to number 9 now, Shrapnel, which is directed by William Kaufman and stars people like Jason Patric and Cam Gigandet. And this for me was just the biggest Taken ripoff. The base premise is the main character, Jason Patric's character, his daughter is taken by the cartel, and he's going to use a very particular set of skills to destroy them. It sounds very familiar to Taken because that's pretty much what it is. It doesn't have a high budget, and that much is clear. And when it comes to the special effects, the choreography, the camera work, the dialogue, anything about this film really on a technical level, it just was not good. It was not memorable. And both Jason Patric and Cam Gigandet are both actors I've seen in substantially better films, but unfortunately in recent years when I have seen them in something, it usually does not bode well. At the end of the day, this was just, like I said before, a Taken ripoff, and there really wasn't anything to this movie that made it stand out, or was exciting, or was even really all that gripping in any way, shape, or form. I was bored to tears while watching this movie. There are times where people are shooting the walls, and there's CGI, like wood chippings coming off the walls, but zero actual damage happening to the walls. The movie was just filled with just a bunch of cheap filmmakings, and the whole film in general, down to its copying of the plot of Taken, is just cheap on every single level. So let's move on now to number 8, which is a movie called Blaze, which actually had some festival screenings in 2022, but had its official release this year in 2023. It's directed by Del Catherine Barton and stars people like Julia Savage, Yale Stone, and Simon Baker, and tells the story of a young girl who unfortunately sees somebody get raped, and in this ends up dealing with her own personal trauma. And as the movie goes on, she's really kind of just leaning into her own imagination, this safe space that she has in her head, and most notably a dragon kind of entity that keeps her safe in her mind to try to navigate her trauma. The movie tries to utilize all these really crazy imagery and the safe space that our own personal mind can be sometimes when trying to deal with trauma in our life, especially at a young age when you see something so horrific. But frankly, there's just no getting around it. The movie was dull and boring, and at times just felt wildly aimless. It was one of the earliest films I saw this year. When I saw the poster, I was actually rather interested in checking out this movie, but unfortunately, this movie just did not work for me pretty much on any level. I was not a fan of this movie, and I honestly could not recommend it to anybody, even for people who are looking for an interesting message that uses trauma to kind of do something cool with it. I just didn't connect with this movie. I didn't connect with the characters. I didn't connect with the story. I think there were some interesting ideas here for sure, and I liked a lot of the practical effects used to bring this dragon to life in our main character's mind. But outside of that, frankly, when it comes down to story and character, this movie just did not work for me. Now let's move on to number 7, which is a film called Attachment, which was directed by Gabriel Beer Gislason, I believe is how you pronounce his name, and stars people like Josephine Park, Ellie Kendrick, and Sophie Grabol. And it's an interesting one because it tells the story of two girls that start a relationship, and they end up going, after one of them has a seizure, back to the hometown of the girl who had the seizure to stay with the girl's mother. And you learn pretty quickly that this mother is incredibly protective, does not treat the new girlfriend well at all. It's a very kind of eerie, creepy movie at times, but most notably kind of uncomfortable. It's going for that kind of unsettling feel and vibe while you're watching the movie, and you're following the perspective of the new girlfriend in this situation, who's just trying to be there for her new girlfriend, but has this mother who doesn't really want her around, and is kind of being incredibly restrictive of this girl who had the seizure. And as the movie progresses, you end up learning that the girl who had the seizure actually has more going on under the surface that is having this mother do this. And on paper, it sounds like such a cool premise, this idea of this kind of unsettling, weird kind of new relationship dynamic with a mother who doesn't seem to like the new girlfriend, and there's actually something going on under the surface with this girl who has seizures. But quite frankly, this movie was a slog to get through. I was wildly bored the entire time while watching this movie. It's just never connected with me. I think this movie is on Shudder now, and it just was something that when I look back at the entire year, just a forgettable film. And I think that that's probably one of the worst things a movie can be in this year. Now, there are some picks as we get closer to number 1 that were so bad that they were just unforgettable. I just could not forget how bad they were, so that the movie and its storyline and things really stick with me. But part of why Attachment is on this list for me personally is not only because it was boring, not only because it just felt like literally a chore to get through, not only because I thought the script was weak, but also because it was so forgettable. You know, it just really had nothing about it that made me latch onto it. And when I was looking at the list of movies that I saw this year, this movie without a doubt just kind of sat at the top as one of the most forgettable movies that I saw this year. And now moving on to number 6 is a movie that I was actually quite excited to check out when I saw the main star of the film, and that movie is called The Unheard, which is on Shudder and is directed by Jeffrey A. Brown and stars Lachlan Watson, Nick Sandow, Michelle Hicks, and many more. And Lachlan Watson specifically is the reason that I was interested in checking out this film, as I initially actually saw them in the TV show Chucky. And if you guys have been following this channel, you know that I love Chucky. He's my favorite slasher horror icon, and I just was really enjoying their portrayal of Glenn and Glenda in that series. And so when I saw that they were going to be leading a movie on Shudder, I was actually really interested to see what this movie was going to be all about. And it follows this young individual who's coming back to their old family home and is staying somewhere that has kind of been abandoned for a while. They have a nearby family friend who's kind of doing them a favor and, like, you know, turning the electricity on and taking care of some of the different maintenance that the home needs for them. And as the movie's going on, this individual is starting to connect with their late mother through technology and is starting to spend their nights over and over again trying to see if they can use their TV to reconnect with their mother in the afterlife. And I won't get too much more into the spoilers in case you want to watch this movie, but ultimately this movie just felt wildly aimless. It feels like our main character is literally just sitting in a room time and time again, scene after scene, and there was really nothing about this movie, similar to the last movie I talked about, that had anything to latch onto for me. The end just kind of comes abruptly and kind of ramps things up to kind of have something happen. But the movie is an hour and some change, hour and 30, hour and 40, whatever. And honestly, it just felt dull. Like, it felt boring for 97% of the movie, with things only really happening in small bursts over the course of the movie and then really happening near the very end of the film. The performances in the film are fine and the movie is well shot, but it feels like just one of those movies that had a nice idea for a short film that ultimately should not have been made into a feature film, because there really wasn't enough substance, there wasn't enough meat on the bone to tell a story that was in any way, shape, or form compelling. It just felt like literally our main character sitting in a room for majority of the screen time. And now we're gonna start moving into some real freaking stinkers, and here we are with number 5, which is A Spoonful of Sugar, which is directed by Mercedes Bryce Morgan and stars people like Morgan Saylor, Kat Foster, and Miko Olivier. And this is a movie that it's just of a type of movie I'm really just getting over and done with at this point when it comes to horror specifically. I'm really done with these horror films that feel incredibly artistic simply because they use a lot of psychedelic visuals and colors throughout the course of the film. It's good cinematography and a lot of sex and just actual psychedelic drugs in the movie itself to try to seem edgy and artistic and different, and ultimately, for me, have really no substance under the surface. And the base premise of this film is you follow a young girl who is taking a job to babysit a young boy who has massively insane allergies and is also autistic, and the mother and the father are struggling with this young boy. You know, he can be very violent at times, he can lash out on them, he's incredibly sensitive to various allergies, so because of that they have to be super vigilant of everything he's got going on. And so they bring in this babysitter to watch over him, to make sure that she keeps with all the rules of the allergies, this, that, and the third. And once the babysitter comes in, we realize that she has her own ulterior motive and that she is a sex crazed, you know, drug using fiend, and she starts to kind of get the hots for the husband in the situation and tries to start sleeping with him. And then we have full-on sequences where she's like doing drugs and just masturbating through her clothes and literally causing herself to bleed in her lower regions because of how hard she's masturbating. That's literally what a lot of this movie is. There are some crazy moments that happen of some tension between the family. There are some moments where the son starts to show some weird moments of lashing out, but ultimately this is just one of those weird kind of just trying to be creepy and eerie horror films that utilizes sex and psychedelic visuals and actual psychedelics for the characters to try to create something that's memorable and it gives you that what the fuck quality, but ultimately for me just left me feeling so bored. I was just dying for this movie to end when I was watching it initially, and I saw that this movie actually doesn't have the worst reviews, so if I'm in the minority on that, I honestly don't care. This movie did not work for me in any way, shape, or form, and I do not look forward to watching it again ever again. Now let's get on to number 4, which, like I said before, one of the worst things a film can be for me is forgettable when it comes down to picking my top 10. You know, there are some movies that are just so bad and just so dull and just so forgettable that they just give you nothing to even remember. And even some of the worst films on this list or at least so bad that I couldn't get the memories out of my mind. They were just stuck there. So here we are talking about a film that actually premiered at one film festival in 2021 and finally got a release now in 2023. And that film is called Giving Birth to a Butterfly, which is directed by Theodore Schaefer and stars people like Annie Parise, Gus Burney, Owen Campbell, Constance Schulman, and more, and tells the story of a mother who's now connecting with this young girl who was impregnated by her son. And now she's kind of going on this adventure to try to find a new path in life, if you will. The mother in this situation is played by Annie Parise, and she's kind of finding herself at a crossroads in her own life. She's not necessarily happy with who she is, and this really, at the core of it, at the end of this movie, is really all about kind of rebirthing, if you will. It's about the idea of even in your older years, you can go and kind of find new meaning and new life within your life and just kind of restart, if you will. And on the surface, that's like, cool, that's a nice message. But the movie is so boring and so dull and moves at a snail's pace and ultimately has nothing going on for majority of the runtime. That's a pretty constant theme here with these movies. I struggle heavily with aimless movies. You know, for me, I'm okay with a slow burn. I'm okay with a movie that, you know, has an overall, you know, strong narrative and strong screenplay, strong character work, even if it literally moves at a snail's pace. As long as I can be impressed by the filmmaking at hand, the dialogue and the story that's being told, the set design, the production value, the cinematography, something, then I can at least appreciate what the movie's going for. But in the case of something like Giving Birth to a Butterfly, it has a nice message that it tries to get across, but it utilizes tons of just weird metaphors and symbolism that ultimately, for me, undercut its overall message. And by the time the movie was over, it just felt like nothing happened. I felt like the last 10 or 15 minutes was all the movie was really predicated on, with everything before that just being characters sitting around talking awkwardly to one another or driving in a car talking awkwardly with one another. It really just had nothing of value to really talk about, and I'm struggling to even think about what to talk about this movie now. It was a forgettable slog of a movie to watch this year, and I just wish that they would have done something with this movie. I almost understand wholeheartedly how this movie premiered at a festival in 2021 and probably struggled to find a distributor all the way up until 2023. I can totally understand, and since this movie is released, I haven't heard anybody else I know talk about this fucking movie. Boring. Now let's move on to a movie I actually covered just a few months ago. This is my number 3 pick, and that is VHS 85, which, similar to the other VHS films, has a slew of various directors and a slew of various actors, as this is an anthology series that jumps around different stories over the course of the movie, of course told in the found footage style of filmmaking, most notably in the case of VHS, trying to fit the various year that they tell this story in. And in the case of this one, it takes place in 1985, the 80s in general. So, you know, you have that 80s aesthetic, you have that 80s music, and they're trying to make the film look like a found footage film that was filmed on some sort of, you know, home recorder, some home camcorder in the 80s. And there are some fun artistic merits to this film. I won't deny that element of it. There are some cool moments of special effects, practical and digital. There's some cool camera work that definitely makes it feel like a film that was recorded on a camcorder in the 80s. But woo, outside of that, this movie was so boring. I never found myself connected. If you watch my review for it, I literally was struggling to find words to talk about VHS 85. The video for me actually did fairly well. I got a lot of backlash, a lot of agreement and disagreement, and that's okay with me, because when it comes to this movie, this is a franchise I'm a little hit or miss with overall, but I have enjoyed installments in the VHS franchise. And for me, 85 was just dull and boring, and there was none of the, you know, various anthology stories in this movie that ever really, you know, latched onto me or made me think, wow, that was cool. It was a fun little cool story. Sometimes they had moments where I was like, okay, I'm enjoying this. But ultimately, by the time the movie was coming to a close, and even just 2 or 3 anthology stories into this movie, I was dying for this movie to end. There were certain storylines inside of this, certain little anthology shorts that were so bad and just had me scratching my head that people made this, that people produced this, that people acted in this, that people directed this, that people anything with this. I hated this movie. I thought it was absolutely terrible, and honestly, it's put me off from even wanting to watch a single other VHS film ever again. And moving on to one I think everyone is expecting to see on this list, and one that I'm expecting to see on a lot of people's list, and that is a movie that got hyped for all the wrong reasons. Number 2 is Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, directed by Reese Frake Waterfield, and stars people like Nikolai Leon, Craig David Dowsett, Chris Cordell. And I mean, what is there to say about this movie? It is a horror film that centers on the character of Winnie the Pooh, and they sold it on that premise alone. They announced it, they showed some early images of it, and people were just excited at the bizarre premise. And now, because of the success that this movie has, simply because of how dirt cheap it was made for, we're getting a sequel to this movie now, as well as a movie about a horror Bambi storyline. And for anybody who's unfamiliar with this or how this can even be, Winnie the Pooh is a character who is in public domain. Of course, most people associate Winnie the Pooh with the Disney property, which is, of course, their iteration of Winnie the Pooh. But anybody pretty much can do a Winnie the Pooh thing because the character is part of public domain. So once it did become part of public domain, yeah, these filmmakers instantly jumped on the opportunity to make this cash grab of a movie that ultimately was just bad. You know, I wish they would have had fun with it at least. I wish I could say that this was like a fun horror slasher. If you've been watching the channel for the last few years, you know that I love slashers. I love dumb 80s slashers, 90s slashers. Chucky's my favorite one. I love Freddy. I love, you know, Ghostface. I love Jason. I love all that stuff. And I always can appreciate even some of the worst films in any of those franchises simply because I have a special place in my heart for dumb horror slashers. So going into this, I was expecting nothing more than a dumb horror slasher. But frankly, what you get is just nothing really. There's not really much to say about this movie. When it comes down to the cinematography, terrible. When it comes down to the dialogue and the acting, atrocious. And the only real base premise here is that Christopher Robin, as a kid, was there hanging out in the 100-acre woods with all of our other friends. And he ends up leaving one day because he grows up older, and they all become these monsters. And years later, when Christopher Robin comes back to the 100-acre woods, he finds that Pooh Bear and Piglet are now murdering psychopaths, and they've pretty much killed everybody else in the 100-acre woods, all of the other characters that you would expect. And yeah, that's pretty much what this movie is. There's a group of girls that end up deciding to go and have a girls' weekend, unfortunately too close to where Pooh Bear and Piglet live, and they're just fodder in this movie to be murdered. There's really nothing else to say about this movie. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey is bad. It's bad. It's a cheap cash grab. It would literally be like if I grabbed 4 or 5 of my neighbors right now with my iPhone and said, yo, we're gonna make a fucking, I don't even know, the Incredibles horror movie, and I just had everybody put on red t-shirts and punch each other around a couple of times on my iPhone with no special effects. That's pretty much what this movie is. And obviously I'm being a little bit exaggerative, but if you've seen this movie, it's pretty bad. It's pretty fucking bad. And now the time has come to talk about what is, for me, the worst film that I saw in 2023. And that movie is called Bad Things, funny enough, which is directed by Stuart Thorndike and stars people like Gail Rankin, Harry Neff, Annabelle Dexter-Jones, and Rad Pereira. And this is a movie that I think they thought was way more clever than it actually was. The writer-director of this film mentioned that a big inspiration for this movie was The Shining, which is very evident when you watch the film, as the movie focuses on a group of young girls who go to a hotel that's owned by one of these girls, by her family, I should say, and the place is abandoned right now. They have it shut down, so they have the entire hotel to themselves, and the movie opens and they're so excited to be running around this hotel, jumping from room to room, using the pool, using the gym, using all the various things there without having to worry about anybody coming in or anybody else being there. They have the full hotel to themselves, and of course, as you would expect with something like this, things start to go weird throughout the course of the film. We start to learn about some weird trauma between the mother of the main girl that we're focusing on in this movie, and some, you know, ghostly things start to occur, if you will, and our main character, similar to like in The Shining, starts to lose their mind just a little bit. This is a film that is clearly inspired by The Shining, but man, what a bad idea to tell people that you were inspired by The Shining for this movie, because it just feels like a cheap Shining ripoff without any of the artistic merit that makes The Shining what it is. This movie was one of the hardest movies I had to watch this year. I mean, genuinely the hardest film that I really can just remember the moments of watching this movie. I was shuffling on this. I was watching it here on this couch with the TV that's right behind the camera. And I was literally like lying down, sitting up, changing how I was sitting consistently. I was restless watching this movie. I was so bored, and everything in me wanted to keep grabbing my phone and just, messing around on my phone, playing a game, watching something else on my phone, scrolling through social media. But when it comes down to movies I review here on the channel, I take it very seriously, and I do my best to not pick up my phone, to not be on my phone or looking at the time and seeing how much longer I have in the movie. I have to fight myself with that sometimes if the movie is as bad as this one. And when it comes down to bad things, when I was really narrowing it down to the movies that just did not work for me this year, Bad Things was the one. It just, funny enough, the movie's called Bad Things, and I do think it's a bad thing. It's a bad movie. This is a cheap remake of a way of The Shining. It's not a remake. It's its own story. It's got its own characters. By no means am I trying to say that this movie is an exact frame for frame, copy of The Shining, but it clearly is inspired by it. It clearly uses similar story points and similar character plot points that movie uses, and it just ultimately falls flat. It's just boring, it's dull, it's bland. The acting is literally probably the worst of any movie that I saw this year, and by the time the movie came to an end, I was just dying for this movie to be over. Could not be happier when the credits started rolling, and I just remember looking at the credits rolling for a moment and just thinking, wow, that was terrible. That was absolutely atrocious. And it's similar, to some of these other movies here, and even talking about some of these movies is kind of tough to me. I love talking about movies, and if you watch my channel and you've enjoyed my videos where I talk about movies positively, you know that when I'm passionate about something, I'm going to be excited to talk about it. I'm going to have tons to say. I like dissecting the various things that a movie has to say and the various themes and elements that are pushed into a movie. But I struggle sometimes when it comes to talking about really bad movies that for me had nothing to say and did not connect to me in any way, shape, or form. I sometimes find myself not just really even having the best way to review this movie mentally. I don't know what the best approach is sometimes. And Bad Things was one of those movies. A lot of these movies, even in talking about them here in this video, they're so forgettable, so bland, and so bad that I just genuinely struggle to really talk about them. So I feel like I'm going to be a little bit more passionate and a little bit more excited, obviously, when we're doing my top 10 best. But here we are, guys. Bad Things was my #1 worst film of the year, and I look forward to hearing all of your guys' various opinions down below. Are any of these movies even movies you saw, or any of these movies on your top 10 best or worst? And let me know down below, what is your top 10 worst films of the year? Definitely looking forward to hearing all the various opinions. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing my opinions on the top 10 worst of this year, and look forward in the next few days for my top 10 best video. A big thanks to you guys for watching, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.